and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosed if it close out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Right now, Christmas night, and Merry Christmas to all. I feel like, though, with the nature of our show, I should put the disclaimer out there that Christmas is not really exactly what it seems, and I know it's not really the topic of the show, so I'll just leave you guys to research that, Saturnalia, and the true origination of why it's celebrated on December 25th and not perhaps in summer. But anyways, let's get into tonight's topic and who is my guest tonight, the one and only Ollie Richardson, which a little intro about Ollie Richardson is that he was he was part of Fort Roos, which I've mentioned a few times on this show, and that's because we and Fort Roos have somewhat of a collaboration, I guess you could say, with each other. And one time I was about to interview also another person over there, Hakeem Flores, but yeah, they talk really specifically about Eastern Europe, Russian-specific issues. A very good source to get some of the stuff that maybe the bigger news sources will overlook because they're not quite big on a world scale, these stories. So, you know, over there, our team might not cover some of the stuff that Fort Roos will cover. But Ollie Richardson was part of that. Right now, he's also part of the Vladimir Putin fan club, which is not as you would think it would be specifically to Vladimir Putin, but actually is really a all-around political discussions have happened inside that group. And this group is not just some small Facebook group. This group has over 100,000 members now. And it's a Facebook group that goes back one of the earliest Facebook groups I can imagine, because they say they started in 2006. Facebook started altogether in 2004, and it significantly grew after 2014. That's when I became a part of it. It was right after the incident, the Euromaidan, and all that went down. I joined around that time. And, well, anyway, with Ollie Richardson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Well, you know, there's a lot of topics right now, and, you know, you mainly focus on Russia and Ukraine, and just in general, you're kind of a political analyst. But, you know, one of the things that happened recently is Andrei Karlov's assassination on camera on December 19th. And now there's a lot of I would say that definitely now there's a lot of questions that are right now going on about, you know, who really perpetuated this and also what this will lead to. I want to ask the first question, and this is a question that I don't even know 100% for sure. Who do you think do you think that this is just a lone gunman or just somebody that, you know, like they claimed assassination, al-Nusra or whatever their name is now, I think Jabhat el-Sham or whatever, but do you think this goes a little bit further than just al-Nusra, or do you think that perhaps Turkish intelligence, NATO, or perhaps Mossad had some kind of involvement in this assassination?
Well, I think we know for sure that it involved some groups related to Al Qaeda. They claimed responsibility for it. So if we follow that train of thought, we know that Obama has funded and provided lots of support for al-Nusra, which is Al Qaeda in Syria. So we cannot rule out American involvement in this assassination.
Well, yes, obviously, since very early into the war, it became very evident. A lot of people via RT and some of the alternative media were covering the fact that the United States government was not just purely funding moderates, and this is a myth that's been going back many times. They did in the Afghani-Soviet wars, told the public that they were supporting the moderates, but really they were all, mostly Islamic fundamentalists, and one of them was Osama bin Laden. Nowadays, they tell us that the moderates are being the only ones being funded in Syria, but the truth was that it's very apparent to anyone that's really paying attention that the support goes way past the Free Syrian Army, who are not a moderate group by any sense when you look at past the facade of the name and what they've actually committed inside of Syria. They've killed many civilians. Their main tactics is going into some heavily populated areas where a lot of civilians are going to go down with them when the Syrian Arab army comes back to retaliate against the Free Syrian Army's actions. The Free Syrian Army has also been caught working hand in hand with ISIS. So there's no nature to FSA whatsoever. It's one of the biggest lies that we're being told over here in the West when it comes to the Middle East is the Syrian situation, the United States involvement. And it's not even that much of a conspiracy theory anymore to say that the United States government had aided the creation, the arming, and the training of the group that we know as ISIS, which is really, if you look at it, is just a CIA Mossad group that wears black uniforms and calls themselves to be an Islamic extremist group. But a lot of the people are not from the Middle East that are in the group. They're Europeans, Israelis, they're Americans. There's so much Western fingerprints on the Islamic extremist inside of Syria.
Well, this whole scam going on in Syria, it was only possible through this idea of moderate opposition, and that means that it's something which is acceptable to American people. They're not ISIS, so they're not so-called extremists. They're moderate, so that's okay. I think that obviously, if they were overtly arming al-Nusra, I think that would be a huge problem, and there would be no support for that in America. So they have this Trojan horse with the green and white flag, which is actually a French colonial flag, and through that they're able to put their own boots on the ground. They give them weapons, and magically these weapons end up with ISIS, with al-Nusra. So really, going back to the Turkey assassination thing, we say that Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility, but the same thing as the Free Syrian Army, and really, all these things trace back to the CIA. So, and ISIS is very different in the sense that it's a product of America's invasion in Iraq. They would create these camps, and they would bring people into these camps, subject them to psychotropic drugs, rape them in front of their mothers. They would do all number of horrible things to turn them into these throat-cutting people. But eventually, people were released from these camps, and this is how al-Baghdadi came around, and he met someone called al-Julani, who is now the head of al-Nusra. So really, again, ISIS, al-Nusra, the Free Syrian Army, it all comes from the same thing, really.
And none of those groups would even exist if the United States have never brought the Mujahideen to the power that they did in the 1970s and
That's
1980s.
true.
It's really, the parent organization is the Mujahideen. Al-Qaeda
Mm-hmm.
comes off of it. Al-Qaeda later turns into Al-Nusra and a few other groups in
Mm-hmm.
Syria and Iraq. ISIS is just pretty much a split off of Al-Qaeda. And pretty much
Mm-hmm.
what ISIS is, how I see it, it's really it's a tool for
Mm-hmm.
for United Kingdom's governments, the United States governments, the Israeli governments to unleash on a country like Syria in order to
Mm-hmm.
destabilize and take out a government that they don't approve of, and it creates. That's when there's
Mm-hmm.
MO since for a long time, since the 1970s and before.
Mm-hmm.
To destabilize countries over there that pose a threat to the United States and Israel homogeny over the region, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then you put in who you want from there, and ultimately they would not have really a problem. The United States government works as pretty much the ideological equivalent in Saudi
Mm-hmm.
Arabia is ISIS. So, the
Mm-hmm.
United States government, the idea that, they wouldn't want these guys in power, why would they ever support these guys? The United States government, not the United States people we're talking about, is because they have had a history of working with them, and that in reality, Islamic
Mm-hmm.
extremism is not, it's just really a extension of Western colonialism. That's how it's been all the way
Mm-hmm.
back to the British pretty much created the Wahhabi ideology as we know today.
Of course.
Was
Mm-hmm. Um, if we go back, maybe to World War II, warfare was very different then, and it was much more direct. But due to advancements in technology, you could no longer really send your troops very close to someone else's border. So now what we have is what's called fourth generation warfare. And a key feature of that is the use of proxies. So, as I mentioned earlier, in order for the American people to accept a war in Syria, there has to be some boogeyman, which in this case is ISIS. And then that justifies dropping bombs on this boogeyman and generally whipping up this almost anti-Islam frenzy in society. But on the wider scale, this is really a war, a large war being conducted against Russia. And this has been over 100 years in the making because it's really, if you like, a clash of ideologies. We have the Anglo-Saxon liberal ideology, and then there was this socialism, communism emerged, and obviously very different ideologies, and really a clash between these two civilizations was inevitable. But you mentioned the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. That was purely an attempt to create a point of destabilization near Russia, to draw Russia into a conflict. But it didn't quite work out the way that America had planned.
Well, ultimately, I think the thing that's kind of serious that they're playing kind of backfiring is that we're seeing and with Aleppo is that you see like it is weird is that you see like this dismay from CNN and these Western journalists acting like this is a horrible thing that Aleppo has now been liberated, and they're calling it the fall of Aleppo. They're making it seem like that every last civilian is going to be, or almost every last civilian in the city is going to be arrested or bombed or killed by the government or something like that. It's crazy. Right now, they've been able to spin everything in Syria, and this Aleppo thing is the recent most example. We had those people that we saw these infamous clips of people saying their last goodbye, supposedly, and then in these places that don't even have internet. Let's say been to Aleppo says that 85% of that place does not have power, so internet's not going to be there. Internet's probably few people, and 3G service is scarce. This is what people that actually been in Aleppo have to say, and that's why somebody on CNN said, I believe it was somebody that actually been to Aleppo was telling on CNN that all these things, and it's like, yeah, that did not happen. These people were a lot of actors. The one girl, remember the famous was the Bana in Aleppo. Her
Mhm.
father was like some terrorist or something like that.
That's
I
right.
don't know much about the specifics, but wasn't he like Al Nusra?
Yeah, he was. There's photographs of him with machine guns in his hands, with Salafist flags. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that infamous scenario. Remember when the Kuwaiti, when the Kuwaiti girl was testifying
That's right.
to,
Babies and incubators.
yeah, that infamous scenario, and then it turns out that her father was the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States.
That's right. So you're already seeing that there's a pattern here where things concepts are reused, and actually you can go as far back as World War One, and English newspapers were publishing things about the Kaiser, claiming that he was like cutting the hands of Belgian children, and because the main two categories which draw the most sympathy generally are women and children. So, in the case of Banner in Aleppo, she looks like just this innocent 7-year-old girl who's apparently being bombed on every day, and but everything like this has a lifespan, and over time these things need to be adapted and changed to match to the new circumstances in order for it to remain believable. And with Banner, it was very difficult because you had Aleppo divided in two, and the Syrian army was moving in closer and closer into East Aleppo, and gradually, as the more closer they came into the East Aleppo, the more videos emerged on social media of all these people fleeing towards the Syrian army, treating them as their saviors, blessing them, thanking them, and going with them to safety. And it really damaged this narrative that was being portrayed in East Aleppo. And then eventually it totally collapsed because they created a humanitarian corridor. And then these moderate rebels were shelling the humanitarian corridor live on camera, and Western news agencies must have been tearing their hair out because there's no way they can whitewash that. And so this image of the bad Syrian army and the good moderate rebels, it was destroyed in East Aleppo.
Yeah, I think that's almost the what's going on as well, is that these rebels, these so-called rebels in Syria, their actions are so inexcusable that I'm sure it's got to make the Western, the Western think tanks and the people that really have the power in the United States, they're making their heads spin because they're like, it's like, oh my God, all you had to do was act like these moderate humanitarians, but then you go, literally crucifying people on the streets of Syria. Or remember that infamous video where the rebel was eating that army commander's liver.
Yeah, the organ. Yeah, when we see things like this, it's indefendable, and even CNN, Fox News, BBC, they can't be seen to support something like that. So when these things are mentioned at State Department briefings, we see John Kirby and Toner, really, they have a prepared script, and it's they ultimately deny everything. A good example is the beheading of the small child. It was done by Noor al-Din al-Zenki. They took this little boy out of hospital and put him on the back of a pickup truck and cut his head off in East Aleppo. And I remember at the time when the State Department was asked about that, and he said that he wouldn't admit who exactly which moderate groups they fund, which ones are vetted, but he said that maybe this one we won't give them any more money, which it's a lie anyway. They will continue to fund them regardless of what they tell the media. But yes, there's many incidents where there was indefendable, and you can't spin it. another example, I guess, could be the bombing of the Syrian army in Deir ez-Zor, where 100 troops were killed by an American. It may have been a warthog, I can't remember, but that's indefendable. And
they spun that one. They tried to make it seem like that they got bad intel or something to that nature, and that they thought those were ISIS that they were bombing. And they killed 106 Syrian army soldiers. Which, when I saw that happen, I was like thinking, "Oh no, it's getting close now." Because I was like thinking, 106 Americans were killed, and perhaps let's say that 106 Americans were killed at Al Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan or something like that, and it was bombing coming from Iran or Syria. We would be at war the next day. We would have the guys on Fox News fucking pointing at the maps and being like, "Okay, this is where we're gonna bomb them here, here, here,
That's
here."
right.
It would be like Iraq all over again, all the same fear tactics, and the only thing we'd be missing is George Bush telling us about how we're gonna stop the axis of evil. We gotta stop them evildoers from getting the WMDs. I'm telling you, Saddam using the WMDs against Israel if we don't stop them.
Yeah, it's very, the way that this whole war is engineered is very clever, I have to admit, in the sense that there's the war on the ground, but there's also the information war, and obviously the American and British and French and Western media in general has a script, and the script is prepared well before the start of the Syrian war, maybe even 10 years before, and it's very the main objective is to maintain support from society, because in the Iraq incursion in 2005, 2006, support for that was starting to diminish because American troops were getting killed, and there wasn't really anything seemingly gained. Al-Qaeda was growing. There were no weapons of mass destruction. So with the Syrian war, they had to think a bit differently. Obviously, there are no real American boots on the ground, but as I mentioned, they can't be seen to be supporting people who eat other people's organs and people who behead children. So in order to, if you want to bomb the Syrian army, you have to have a plan ready for the information war, and you would say, yes, it's bad intel, blame the intelligence, when actually the Syrian army always occupied that hill, and the America never came over there to help them, so it was a disaster.
Yeah, obviously these lies are very easily unraveled when you look into it a few steps. That's how it's been throughout the Middle East. It's like Syria is not the only example. Of course, it's like the Yemen and a few other major lies that have been perpetuated, and that one right there was just one of many more lies. To most Americans, they see that and they're going to believe it because they don't know too much about the situation. They're confused altogether. Americans, they hear all different names and they just think it's a bunch of Muslims. I don't care. They're killing each other. Yeah. That's how they see it. That's unfortunately how a lot of Americans see the Middle Eastern situation, and they don't get.
There's like an opaque screen which obfuscates what's really going on, and as long as there's a vague narrative, and the vague narrative is that we are fighting ISIS, and for 99% of people, this is simplistic enough to absorb in their brains, because they watch enough Hollywood movies and they have an antagonist and a protagonist. And so this binary way of thinking, it's very easy to exploit that. So it's simple. You have the good guys and you have the bad guys. And when you simplify it like that, really, you can.
It reminds me of if you ever watch that animated show that the Boondocks.
Oh yes.
remember when Ed Wuncler is telling them after they were about to stage the demolition of the Wuncler building, and then they're asking why would you do such a thing, and he explains it. Well, people like to see how they see things in the movies. Good guys, bad guys, black guys, all that shit.
Yeah, it's true. And then actually, Hollywood plays a major role in conditioning people. An example would be Chris Kyle, who is hero sniper who was in Iraq. The movie about him was basically promoting genocide and illegal invasions and general aggression. But you when you have influential people like Clint Eastwood, who's pro-war and pro super patriot, then you can sell things like that, and there's no problem.
Well, yeah, Chris Kyle, it was despicable how they switched it up. Even if you read his book, which I never actually read in full length, but I saw that apparently in his book he pretty much talks about his love for killing. This man's obviously a psychopath, Chris Kyle. And the movie flipped it around to be some kind of hero. It kind of reminds me, it seems like it really was almost like to the level of propaganda like Stoles Their Nation or something like that, or the old Nazi propaganda films. It was almost to that level. And that would be the kind of theme that they would put, would be, some heroic German soldier eliminating all the Americans or Russians in some battle or whatever. But here it's, eliminating all the Muslims. That's how Americans see it. Eliminating the Middle Easterners or terrorists. And that's the same. The Middle East is just down to one vague narrative, and that's how it usually is in the wars, that they don't need to really express the details too much to Americans, just that they know in Vietnam it's that we're stopping communism from spreading. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we're stopping terrorism from spreading. And now what I fear is that potentially with any kind of situation made in Ukraine in the future, it's going to be to stop the Russian menace from spreading, which is bringing back with all this recent propaganda in the media. It really feels like McCarthy level propaganda that we haven't seen in 30 years on our TVs. And I want to actually switch up to go a little bit over there to Ukraine right now. And we hear all the time on our TVs, they talk about, like I heard on CNN the other day, they were talking about, they said that Ukraine had been raped and pretty much plundered. Those weren't the exact words, but it was something like, it was pretty strong words they were saying about Russia, what they have done inside of Ukraine. I kind of just thought to myself, wait, Russia actually has done remarkably little in Ukraine, and actually, in a way, that's what the only thing I could criticize Russia on is maybe that they haven't helped the East Ukrainians in their struggle against the fascists over in Kiev enough. But in Crimea, they came in there with 96% support when the vote actually happened for them to become part of Russia. They voted 96% in support of that. And what is the United States going to say? No, that wasn't legitimate. That was probably rigged. I mean, I would get if it's 51, 52%, you might be able to levy that accusation, but it was 96%.
It was unanimous.
Yeah, I don't even know who the 4% probably were. I mean, probably most of those 4% were probably paid off by Right Sector or somebody else, or loyal. I mean, you talk about 96 to 4%. That's a almost unanimous decision. I want to ask, and since you have a lot of insight into the Ukraine, do you think this is going to become a frozen conflict similar to like Transnistria or South Ossetia, Abkhazia, these kind of countries that don't really have much recognition, and they kind of just stay in like a frozen status and somewhat of a frozen conflict in these countries since the Cold War's ended?
I think the first thing to say is that Ukraine and Syria are directly connected. America created another Afghanistan essentially on Russia's border in Ukraine, and Syria is really the middle of the planet essentially, because you have America on one side and Russia on the other, and because of technology they're not able to attack each other directly because it just would be wipe out humanity. So it was you have two theaters, but one obviously is right on Russia's border, and the main difference, I think, with to Syria is that the Ukraine conflict involves Russian people, and
Well, it's much closer to home to them. This is literally, Ukraine is historically Russian. Crimea is
yeah.
historically Russian.
We're talking about the Soviet Union, and all of this was together. Soviet Union consisted of many languages, many different ethnicities, but they all lived under one common nation. And Ukraine, there was no problem in Ukraine, in the southeast, or in the middle, or in the west. It only really started to go wrong around independence and the collapse of the Soviet Union, both of which are heavily engineered by the West and the CIA. So, for example, we talk about, you mentioned right sector in Ukraine. Right sector stems from Stepan Bandera, who is a collaborator with Hitler's Nazi party. And there was there's been undercurrents in Ukrainian society, specifically in the West Ukraine, that have been dormant for a long time, and now they've been reactivated because obviously America wants to pit Russian people against one another. So you asked me whether I think it'll evolve into something greater. I don't think it will, because now that we have Trump in power, Trump doesn't want to create any more problems for Russia, I don't think, and he sees Ukraine as a problem. It hinders any possibilities to develop a relationship. So I think there'll be a gradual de-escalation. There's no support anymore in Ukrainian society for the war, because people, the tariffs are and utility bills are increasing exponentially, but the oligarchs, for example, the president Petro Poroshenko, is making more and more money. People wondering, what is the purpose of this war? There are more complicated things to do with Nadia Savchenko, who is being used as a way to really voice the discontent of Ukrainian people. But I think, to summarize, I would say that there's going to be a large de-escalation. I think the only way that the southeast of Ukraine could coexist with the rest of Ukraine is if it is given special status, because people who live in Donetsk or Lugansk do not want to associate themselves with people who live in Kiev, who have supported this war from the start, and who have fallen for propaganda, and who seemingly have a fetish now for fratricide. I think the people in the southeast would like their own region and their own central power and their own government. And I think,
going back, I want to go back to what you were saying about the Trump, and this brings up a very interesting question. And I have a different opinion. Is that I don't think Trump's gonna. I feel like any kind of relationship between the United States under Trump will be short-lived, and I'll tell you why. Is because Trump. Ultimately, the people that he's being surrounded with, you got Tillerson, who might not be against Russia, but he's definitely has a history of sabotage against countries like Venezuela. He was involved with sabotage against Venezuela. That's a very strong Russian ally. And that seems to be the thing, is that Trump might not necessarily attack Russia with his rhetoric, but he attacks very strongly Iran, one of Russia's strongest allies, really, it could be what you say is their second or third most strongest ally on the entire world is Iran. Then you have Venezuela that Trump has called out, probably the strongest ally that Russia has in the South American continent, for sure, I would say, now that Brazil's no longer singing the tune of Mother Russia. Now Brazil's now under the right-wing fascist Temer, who has taken over, and now he's pro-American. So I don't think that any relationship between Brazil and Russia is going to last very long from now. I mean, it's already fallen apart. And then you have Cuba that Trump's also called out. So a lot of Russia's strongest allies around the world, Trump has a very strong dislike towards. And the only thing that really Trump and Russia is Trump seems to like Russia or in his rhetoric at a direct level. But when it comes to a world policy, foreign policy, and when it comes to things that are really going to matter, because Iran is one of the things that it made Trump. Trump says one thing, but ultimately the position has been the same all throughout, and that the fact is that the AIPAC, the people that really have a lot of political power inside the country, inside the United States, the big lobbying groups, the think tanks, your Council of Foreign Relations, your Trilateral Commission, they've all are talking about a future invasion of Iran at some point in the future, which would absolutely cut off any potential relationship with Russia. So I wonder, how long do you think that this relationship would even last between Russia and the United States?
So whenever people ask me this, I always say the same thing, that it's not what Trump will do, it's what Trump can do. And what I mean by that is the spheres of influence around the world are being reconfigured right now. I think clearly Trump is maybe interested in reactivating the Monroe Doctrine, which would mean further domination over South America. We already see, as you mentioned, in Venezuela, Cuba, Brazil, Mexico is basically an American state anyway. So America's is basically being ejected from the Middle East now. It has really no say or no influence on what happens there. America still has some room for maneuver in Latin America in terms of asserting its influence, creating a more localized sphere. In terms of Iran, obviously Iran's largest enemy in the region is Israel. So you have to assess Trump's attitude to Israel. Trump has said in the past he prefers Israel to pay its own way, which means maybe not receiving $5 billion a year or whatever it is anymore. Israel is in a precarious position now because Russia has provided Hezbollah with not only the physical means to defend itself, and I mean anti-air missiles, but also because Russia defended Damascus, it essentially solidified Hezbollah's status in the region and in Syria. So Hezbollah is not going anywhere. So I think Trump is maybe forced to back away a bit from Israel. And we saw 2 days ago, Israel, there was a bill, a resolution passed at the UN, which will reduce the number of Israeli settlements in West Bank and Gaza. And America abstained from voting, which is I thought that was very shocking because everyone expected them to veto it. They did not. So we're already seeing signs that Trump is backing away from Israel, which would mean that Trump isn't interested in aggravating things between Israel and Iran. It means that Trump really understands that he has to focus more on problems at home and really to not step on Russia's toes because really Russia, not just militarily, but economically, is really now in the driving seat. And I don't mean that in a hegemonic sense. I mean purely that Russia is reinventing international law, because obviously.
What has happened is, like we were talking about, is that Russia is rejecting the unipolar world that the United States and Israel sought things to, that they want to achieve, and ultimately the people that really control the United States and Israel is really behind that. They just keep that in mind. The big bankers, your big think tank organizations, yeah. Well, AIPAC is an extension of really the Zionist influence in the United States. It's the lobbying group that pretty much pressures most politicians to directly take in really in what is Israel first mentality that most of the politicians have. And that's why I'm really skeptical about Donald Trump, is that because we've had the last president, he claimed at first. Remember, he was talking about pushing Palestine or pushing Israel back to its pre-67 borders, which never happened. And we've had a little, what I would say, a little bits of disagreements between the United States and Israel. Never really hostile tensions or anything like that. In fact, the United States and Israel's relationship is one of the closest in the world, and it's really a parasitic relationship on the American person. That $5 billion you're talking about, that's like a flat pay. That's what we pay regardless of anything. Pretty much every year we're going to pay over $5 billion a year to Israel. But there's all these packages and stuff like that we give to Israel for no real reason. It's not like that we get anything really in return. It's just for them being them. We hand out a few billion more there, a few billion more there. There was, recently there was a $30 billion package over like 10 years that was signed. So it's like for the next few years, we're going to be giving them even more than that $5 billion. And remember, this is for a country the size of Connecticut. So
you mentioned the large $30 billion, and I think that package was compensation for the Iran deal, the nuclear deal. But you're right. You mentioned something very important. You said, what does America get out of the relationship with Israel? The answer is really nothing. It's a parasitical relationship. And this is because, yes, we have lobbies like AIPAC who are able to purchase senators and congressmen and basically purchase their votes. And obviously there are people who are in high positions in the House of Senate and Congress who have close relationships with the military-industrial complex. So I suppose the only benefit America gets from incursions in the Middle East is that it makes companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all these companies who manufacture weapons, it makes them money. But the American taxpayer, it doesn't see any of those profits.
Yeah, it's the military-industrial complex that's ultimately going to see the money in the end, and there's much more than just those few that actually make the perhaps the bombs. For example, here in where I live, not too far, we have a Raytheon. We have two massive defensive subcontractors right here in the area. St. Pete. We have up in Clearwater. We have Honeywell, which they actually make, I think, like the rocket parts for the missiles that they put on the planes. And Raytheon does like the more technical. They have the guidance systems and stuff like that. They work with that kind of stuff. And there was actually a big scandal with Raytheon here in the areas that they were dealing with chemicals of some kind, and it polluted all the groundwater around here. And, of course, it didn't really lead anywhere. And then we have that big, giant Air Force base over not too far from here in Tampa, Florida, which is the Southern Command for the United States. This is one of the biggest Air Force bases that they have in the United States. It's one of the most secretive. There's like a base inside of a base. It's like right up there with Wright-Patterson, Area 51. So you imagine right there, it's like you see the defensive subcontractors. They make the parts. They put it together. They put it on the planes right there at MacDill. And it's a very lucrative business for a select few. These people, I mean, every time that there's some kind of crisis where we are nearly at War III, like what happened when we were went into Syria in August of 2013, well, in September 2013, Raytheon's stocks reached a all-time high at that point. Every time they pretty much profit off of death and destruction. They're the war profiteers that Eisenhower talked about in his famous speech back in the 1950s when he warned us about the military-industrial complex, and was also really some of the first people to rally against it was the Socialist Party all the way back in World War I, when you had Eugene Debs talked about these war profiteers and how they made so much money off of World War I, and they would make a lot of money off of World War II. And these kind of people will lend money and give arms to both sides of a war. They don't care. They don't care about the winner. The only because they win either way.
It's a good idea to think back again to World War One, and actually you talk about Israel and the tentacles of Israel, even though it didn't exist at that time, but the key thinkers of Zionism, they really had their tentacles around the British government and now subsequently the American government. I don't understand how people in America can allow something like this. I mean, maybe they don't know about it, but surely when like you said, you look on the stocks of companies like Raytheon and you see they're making money, and people must think, well, I can't afford to pay my mortgage, but Raytheon's making lots of money. How is this possible? And it's I think if people became more aware of this, I don't even think things like Iraq and Syria would even be possible. But clearly, propaganda and years of conditioning works its magic, and clearly people are happy to hand over their tax money and not really think about where it's going. It's very bizarre, but yeah.
Well, that's the thing about Americans, though, is that I hate to say it, but a lot of Americans, they're in a trance, and that kind of stuff doesn't even concern them whatsoever. And the thing is that because they're at that brink of, just making it, they're just enough to pay their rent or whatnot, and they're working 60 hours a week to be able to just, provide for their family and live in a small apartment somewhere. They're too tired to keep up with these different events, to keep up with what these the corruption that's going on in this country, what's happening with our politicians. There's a lot of people in this country that really don't know too much more than really when the election happens. It's like, oh yeah, Trump's the president, but they don't know anything about his picks. They don't know about, Tillerson. That's one of the more concerning ones to me was Tillerson. And anything that's going on in the Middle East, oh my God, that's practically like, if you watch Charlie Brown, when the adults start talking, wah, 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 anytime they start hearing something about that, it goes through one ear and out the other ear. But Americans this is one of the most important time to look at what's really going on, because right now we have a lot of things that are going on. We have the potential for it all breaking loose over there in Syria, Ukraine, and the South China Sea. I would say that how tense the world is right now in the last few years is probably about the same as how tense it was in 1960s, right around the Cuban Missile Crisis. We've had points in the last few years where our how close we were to all-out war breaking loose was almost as bad as the Cuban Missile Crisis, but nowadays it's not quite as reported. Nowadays they try to make it seem like nowadays they have different terms for it. They have different. They'll say, and they'll say, oh, we're working towards peace, even though the reality is that they're nowhere even near a negotiation. They're actually near war. It's like what happened with the Yemen situation and the Syrian situation. Many times like this. Difference. I'll ask you a question. Since you live over there, you're based out of the UK, and you said you work over in France. Is it any different over there in France and the UK? Are people actually more interested in what's going on, or is they just more upset? Are they just obsessed with celebrity bullshit like over here in the United States?
Okay, I would say that generally the UK is worse than France. Now, France has been colonizing Africa for a long time. France was involved in an agreement with Britain during the First World War called Sykes-Picot, which essentially partitioned the Middle East. And France had many countries under its mandate as a result of that, like Lebanon. So France has a more colonial mindset, like owning countries. Britain's a bit different in the sense that it wants it wants Britishness to be everywhere, but yet can't quite define what Britishness is. In terms of being educated in all of these things, I would say all of Western Europe and Britain is diabolical. I watch French TV enough, and I see they regarding Syria, they use footage from the White Helmets. They use the same narrative that CNN uses about how evil the Syrian army is, how Assad drops barrel bombs, etc., etc. But England is worse in the sense that in England you have to pay a license fee to watch television. You know, it is illegal to watch television and not to pay basically a tax. So in England, you're paying for the privilege of being lied to, of being spoon-fed propaganda. In France, they don't have a system like that. I think overall, I feel England's is a bit more intense in general for example, like promoting Russian aggression or any false narrative like that. France is a bit more like a lapdog who listens to whoever holds the whistle. But Britain's more of a real bully, and there has been I think I call it like post World War II syndrome, in that Britain has never moved on from World War II, and it's still we're still conditioned and programmed to fear things like when the Luftwaffe was bombing Britain and we were victims and we had to rebuild our houses. And I think Britain has not, the psychology has not moved on from that. We still think we're a victim and we still think we have to defend ourselves. France does not think like that at all. It's more about managing the colonies they have. But Britain has a different psychology for sure.
I gotta ask, so is that tax, do you like pay it directly to the British government just to like receive any kind of communications on your TV, or how does that work? Because we hear, we have to pay communications tax, and it's like included in our cable bill. So yeah, we're paying all the money you lied to over here in the United States as well.
So if you well, I'm not talking about cable here, or no private sports packages or anything. So if you want to watch the basic package of channels, which includes state TV, you have to pay, I guess in America it would be like $130 a year. But the joke is that you're only paying that for the state channels, which total maybe 3 or 4 out of 100. So even if you didn't watch those channels, you still have to pay the tax because it's still included in the broadcasting, in the digital broadcasting. So basically, if you don't pay the tax, you can go to jail, and that is very Orwellian. I certainly don't agree with it, and actually, many people choose not to pay that and to just hope that they don't get caught. But however, I would say most do pay it through fear of not wanting to go to jail.
That is ridiculous, honestly. That here in America, I mean, it is similar. Like I said, is that it's via FCC taxes and stuff like that that's usually included in whatever you're buying. But they get the three basic TV. I don't think they're you put up your antenna, and then once you put up your antenna, it's free. I mean, you get your free TV. It sucks, but at least you get those few channels, and you're not paying a tax or you're not paying anybody to watch those. You get like 20 nowadays. Nowadays they have quite a few that go over free over the air. But it was cable and stuff like that. They have the ridiculous taxes, and that's why we end up paying like $150, for cut rate television. That ultimately we get a bunch of line channels, and then you might get perhaps like BBC or whatever. And I really despise when people here in America be like, "Oh, I'm different from everybody else because I watch BBC for my news, so that means I'm actually getting the truth or whatever." People think that it's better than watching CNN or Fox. I'm like, there's a reason why they call it British Bullshit Corporation. You know that, right?
And actually, there was a scandal here recently. You may know of Russia Today, which is Russian state TV, but it's in English language, and it has a license to broadcast in the UK. But suddenly, randomly, out of nowhere, the bank account of Russia Today in the UK was frozen, and at the time the British government denied any involvement in that. But there's clearly a fight here to remove any channels that do counter this Western narrative of Russian aggression. Assad is bad. Saudi Arabia is a great free country, etc., etc. There's definitely some sort of little war going on, but also within the last year, Al Jazeera actually stopped all their operations in America, probably for financial reasons, but also I think that I don't think many people were buying what they were selling. So even though there are good, unbiased channels that are being attacked, also the biased and real heavy propaganda channels are also being suffering. But this is all part of this new global reconfiguring going on, and part of the information war. Russia Today is still broadcast in the UK, so obviously if they ever wanted to fully stop their operations, they failed. We still have Al Jazeera broadcasting here. For those who don't know, Al Jazeera is basically extremely Salafist, pro-Qatar, pro-Saudi Arabian, just horrible. And it's the same in France. You can watch these channels too, but obviously you have French state TV. But generally, yes, the state of American TV is certainly a problem.
And you mentioned Al Jazeera. They're terrible, honestly. And what's bad is that they like disguise themselves. A lot of people fall for their. They have like a Facebook channel that's called AJ Plus, which if you're not really paying attention, yeah, if you see, you don't think Al Jazeera or anything like that. They don't have like their Al Jazeera logo with distinctive Islamic writing or Arabic writing. So you don't. But they'll push stuff like what I do give them credit for is that they do talk a little bit about the Palestinian situation. But here's what I've taken note from all these Arabic countries that talk about the Palestinian situation. It's usually just a political tool that in reality they don't do anything about, and they actually are big traitors as Israel. For example, Turkey, Erdogan might every now and then he'll talk about how he feels bad for Palestine and that Palestine should be liberated. But at the same time, he'll trade so much with the Israeli government. So, and Israeli companies. So obviously it's ultimately just a political tool like Al Jazeera uses it. And then what they do push is really supporting Zionist-backed death squads in Syria with their propaganda. The white helmets, come on, these people have been debunked already. They're not this humanitarian organization that everyone's trying to push them to be. I see people, even young people falling for it that I went to high school with, they'll share something. And it's like, and they make it appears to be this heartfelt story about them rescuing some kid out of rubble. In reality, that kid's been rescued out of that same rubble apparently 7 times. You know, you have that happening. It's like, wait a minute, that kid looks familiar. Oh yeah, because he was rescued a month ago, 3 months ago, 5 months ago. But people are not longer believing it so much, and you're right. There's a reconfiguration happening in the world, and that's what Syria and a lot of these wars that we're seeing going on right now is that the old power, the New World Order, the Rothschilds, the people at the top, you know, the ones that have been aspiring for their global domination for so many years, are starting to lose. It's starting to go the opposite way for them, and they're fighting to hold on to it.
It was inevitable because it's not just that the West is declining, more that the East is really rising. And if we take China as an example, they are doing almost 100 years of development in the space of 20 years. It's quite incredible what they're doing, and yes, it comes at the expense of things like pollution and population problems. But over time, when these things start to steady out, when the dust starts to settle, this reconfiguring, we will see. No more will we see America being the number one force. China's more of an economic thing, I think, and they're building this Silk Road project to really create this large trade network between many countries, of which Russia is a part of. Russia is more, I think, more militarily strong than China, and actually Russia's economy is doing very well. Despite what the Western media says when they say that Russia's in recession and that Russia's oil prices are low and that things are very bad in Russia. I hear it all the time, but it's absolute lies and nonsense. And if anything, Russia is actually more developed than China in many aspects. But I don't really know who is behind the curtain, like you say about the NWO and the Rothschilds. I don't really know who is behind the curtain. There's been many instances of who we've seen glimpses of the feet of these people. And actually, Israel would not exist if it wasn't for agreements with Rockefellers and
wrote to the Rothschilds. It was wrote to one to run the Rothschilds, promising their land. So yeah, the Rothschilds were also the ones that built the Knesset. They have the Supreme Court is on Rothschild Boulevard. It's their footprints in Israel. And it's not even a conspiracy theory to say that Israel and Rothschilds are so closely connected. And Rothschilds, it's ultimately in a way like their HQ.
You mentioned Palestine, and Palestine is in a bit of a precarious position right now because there are elements of radicalization, especially Salafism and Wahhabism, creeping into Palestinian society. And I see videos and pictures all the time of suicide bombers being used in Syria who are Palestinian. So you mentioned about Al Jazeera and Palestine, and I think the reason why Al Jazeera mentions Palestine is because they're trying to subvert Gaza Strip and the West Bank to try and make them become these terrorists that they've depicted them to be for so long. And obviously Israel would like to claim much more land, but I have a slight feeling that Palestine, it may never actually be fulfilled, in that it will never have its land back that it had around the 1960s, because I think that Trump knows that he has to appease Israel enough to not anger them, and that's why Palestine, I think, is. I think a lot of people are a bit, almost like romantic with this idea of Palestine, and that it represents ultimate resistance and revolution. But um, the, they have people like Abbas representing them, and he's only a product of corruption within the PLO. Um, I really, Palestine is in a very precarious position. There is really no one defending their interests at the moment.
Well,
Maybe Russia is that force. Maybe
well,
Russia.
Russia and China have both expressed their willingness to help the Palestine, at least may not, what would be the romantic solution, which is what I would hope to see one day, is that the complete restoration of their land prior to all the agreements, and Palestine being a secular state that both Jews and Arabs could live peacefully like existed back before 1947. That was under British mandate, but before, it went before all that, but I wanted to shift the conversation actually a little bit, because that we talk about Russia. You can't talk about Russia of today without talking about China, and China. The Chinese question is what I think of it, because honestly, it's like a puzzle to me, because China has relied on so much of American business, American corporations, and a lot of other really America and China are kind of in a way, what at least appears to be on face value, codependent. So I couldn't imagine China completely splitting away from the United States and becoming completely independent. And China has had a kind of a history, if you look at it, of not really siding with a lot of the countries that they are that they're going to side with now. For example, what I've seen is China's had a record of voting at the UN against countries like Syria. They'll go with the Western countries on a resolution against them, or North Korea, or some of the other their so-called allies. I feel like China's almost kind of like they play whatever card is better for them at the moment. But to believe that they're going to pick one side and stick to it, I'm a little bit skeptical of it. And do you have any solid beliefs that you think that China and Russia are going to stay permanently allies down the next 20, 30 years?
I think at the moment the relationship between Russia and China is quite loose, flexible. I don't think there's any great dependency on one or the other. We've seen China help Russia out at the UN Security Council in Syria recently to veto any Western, French, American resolutions, especially no-fly zones. China has made significant efforts to reconciliate with countries like Taiwan and other countries that there was a bit of tension between. I think the president, Xi Jinping, obviously understands that there comes a point when you have to draw a line in the sand and say that was the past and this is now. But we have, to answer your question, we have to talk about BRICS, and BRICS is obviously it was built by Russia to counter the International Monetary Fund, to offer an alternative to hyperinflated loans, especially to developing countries in Africa. BRICS is like a mixed project with Brazil, South Africa, India, Russia, and China. But obviously, Brazil has collapsed. Let's just say the CIA managed to take it away. India is it's almost seemingly hit its plateau and is now facing problems with Pakistan. It could escalate into something, but they have economic problems now, India. South Africa, it's not, to me, it's not really relevant, South Africa, in the grand scheme of things. So I think Russia and China are the backbone of this resistance against things like the International Monetary Fund. And so as long as there's a fight, as long as there's a need, a necessity to offer an alternative to things like the IMF, the Russia-China relationship can last as long as it needs to. I can't imagine a scenario where they would be any hostilities between Russia and China, because I think they both understand that because of this reconfiguration, that they both need to see things the same way and have the same outlook, if they want to have themselves stable countries. It's really a wait and see thing, but I think that Russia and China have a lot of potential in their relationship, and it can benefit everyone, including America, including Britain, including France, regarding trade, regarding the sale of armaments, for example, like jobs, operations.
Hey, I don't know what's going on with the signal there, but it seems like you're breaking up. What were we trying to say? Like all of that was like jumbled.
All right. I was saying that China and Russia are really the backbone against this International Monetary Fund, US NGO domination of both Europe and the Middle East. And the relationship between the two has lots of potential in many spheres: military, economic, cultural. Because obviously America is it's not just a superpower; it's a hyperpower, and so really, in order to counter that, you need two big superpowers who can join together to become like a hyperpower. So I think what we're seeing is some vast cooperation between Russia and China to create a balance and thus a potential which can create like an inverted Iron Curtain. And especially Russia needs help against NATO. And I think China can offer that, especially diplomatically, and with places like the UN Security Council.
Yes, it actually was only like 15 seconds where the signal was going bad. I was getting worried. It seems like we have, I don't know, my show we have luck with technical problems. I don't know why that is. Sometimes I say that it's the NSA or something like that. They mess into the communications every now and then. But yeah, talk about that. Russia definitely needs help against NATO and all the Western countries. Russia alone can't face all those countries by themselves, or at least not at the moment. They would have to build up, and they need a very strong ally, and maybe that's why they're looking, or at least testing. I would say that maybe it's the Chinese experiment that Putin's really, he's not going to dive right into the pool, but he's going to put his feet and feel the water and feel if it feels right before he jumps in. That's where it is right now. That Putin, he just has his feet right now in the water, but he's going to wait. And there's his reliable allies, but the thing is that his reliable allies are much smaller countries with not nearly as much global impact. You have Iran might be, now that I think about it, might be the most powerful ally that Russia has in the world when it comes to their global impact, because a lot of Russia's allies are smaller countries like Venezuela, Cuba, the third world, really. And it's kind of that's partially in the reason that is because the people, the third world, were so disenfranchised by American imperialism all the way through the Cold War, having fascist dictatorships supported all around the world. In South America, Operation Condor happened. In Africa, you had people like the dictator Seko, who was the leader of the Zaire for all those years, that was backed by the United States. And you had these horrible men, Egypt, Mubarak was backed by the United States for all those years. All across the world, the third world's been affected by American imperialism. That's why the people are going to look towards Russia if they're going to look to a larger country to ally with. Now, the United States, they have more like second world powers, countries like France, the United Kingdom. You could say are first world powers, but smaller first world powers. But they don't have, I would say that in a way, Russia has potentially more allies, but they're smaller countries, while America relies on a select few for their influence.
And often, Russia has allies in things like Orthodox Christianity. So an example of that would be Serbia, and there is a lot of potential in the relationship between Russia and Serbia, because America has tried very, very hard over the past 5 or so years to really put in their own guy inside Serbia. And the current leader of Serbia, Vucic, has been playing a very delicate balancing game of appeasing both America but appeasing Russia. But as of late, some shifts favouring Russia, and even both the Prime Minister and President of Serbia have made statements saying that they will never turn their back on their Russian brothers. I can't imagine a scenario where America is able to use their NGOs or use the color revolution tactic to install a very pro-American power there. But there are other examples of smaller countries who are allies to Russia, not for economic purposes, but for more of building a nation. But definitely the destruction of Yugoslavia by NATO and by America was a deliberate attempt to take away allies of Russia in the hope to have one big NATO base in that area. And the best that they could do was Kosovo. Kosovo is obviously very close to places like Belgrade, but I can't imagine a scenario where America can launch an attack on Belgrade from Kosovo. Not today. I think if they wanted to do that, they would have to revert back to injecting things like the Mujahideen in Bosnia, to stoke things up again in countries in and around Serbia. But yes, you're right. America certainly almost buys or bullies its allies. Russia does not do that. Its relationships are much more sincere and based on things like brotherhood and building a nation.
Well, you see the ways that countries have become allies as the United States, compared to how countries become allies as Russia. Countries become allies of Russia, like you said, because of religious, the ties between peoples of the countries. Serbia's and Russia's ties go back, hundreds of years, and even World War I, you saw that. It goes. Their relationship is pretty special, actually. It's a lot of people call it it's a Slavic brotherhood.
It is.
While America's allies is stuff like what happened for example, how Chile became an ally for many years of the United States, because the United States bombed the crap out of, or ordered the Chilean Air Force to bomb the crap out of La Morena Palace, force Allende into shooting himself and and doing a military coup against the country. And that's how a lot of countries became allies of the United States, and they're currently allies of the United States. Brazil is going to go down the same route, but nowadays they do it a little bit differently. Is that maybe they don't do it with violent coups anymore, but nowadays they do it more with parliamentary coups and secretive deals.
Right. Yeah.
Backdoor deals, it seems to be kind of the trend nowadays. It used to be do it out in the open. They used to do like 1973 in Chile, or they did in really the last real attempt that I saw was 2002 in Venezuela. They tried, and they realized that nowadays that doesn't really work as easy, because people are prepared, I guess, and that's why in Venezuela, like 1 million people came out and supported Chavez to block the attempt.
I think you've raised a very good point. The model of color revolutions, which is essentially creating grassroots non-governmental organizations who take an existing contradiction in society and use it to create something much greater. An example being what happened in Ukraine in 2014, where there was this promise from the Ukrainian government about EU membership, and America took this scenario, and they were able to almost in the blink of an eye, remove the government and put their own guy in. But this color revolution model is really starting to become ineffective because countries like Russia, through security services like the FSB, they have really enough experience and enough intelligence, and especially since Vladimir Putin was the head of the KGB back in the 90s. Really, it doesn't take people like him long to calculate how these things work, and that's why there's a region in Russia called Ekaterinburg, which is renowned and notorious for U.S. NGOs, particularly one called the Yeltsin Center, which is this museum that's there now, which is unbelievably anti-Russian and teaches people to basically hate their own genetics. It's crazy, but Putin knows very well about the attempts in this region of Russia to launch a color revolution. They have their own candidates, they have their own parties, for example, like Parnas, which is a fifth column party. They have people like Navalny, who's a supposed Russian opposition, but he really has no support from anyone, really. The last effective color revolution was probably Egypt. There was Ukraine as well, but in terms of launching something very significant, I think Egypt was the last successful one. Syria wasn't really a color revolution. It was a case of, like Aleppo, they brought people from the countryside into the main cities, and these people already radicalized. The people in the cities didn't want a revolution, or so-called revolution, but these people from the countryside, like from Latakia, who were brought into Aleppo, these people were already basically bought and paid for by the US. So there needs to be a new strategy for removing people who are deemed undesirable, and we've seen that in Brazil with Dilma Rousseff, who was impeached. Seemingly, that's a much more almost legitimate way of removing someone, rather than like Gaddafi, where they drag him into the street and put a bullet in his head. These things are much more acceptable and maybe are more legal. But I really don't think that Trump's going to have much success doing these things in this new reconfigured order. I think there's going to have to be a point where Trump understands that now's the time to be honest, because Russia has behaved honestly and sincerely. And
well, there's a problem with, the thing is that nowadays they can do it different ways because, unfortunately, and a lot of Russia's allies, some of the smaller countries, they still have the financial connections back to London, back to Tel Aviv, back to the people, the big bankers, the money people. These people, the people that actually have the money, the bankers, the Rothschilds have the presence in a lot of these countries, and unfortunately, it's very easy when you have these people there, and you also have a United States embassy there. Those two getting together, the one to finance, another one to plan all the logistics. It's very easy to subvert. Very easy to get people to, to do something like what happened in Egypt, where they were able to replace. They knew that one pro-American dictator was going to fall out, so they brought another one in, which was Mohammed Morsi, to replace him. And that was what happened in Egypt, or in a lot of these, so-called Arab Spring. In Syria, that's really how it originally started. It wasn't actually. It started as non-violent very shortly, and then it became violent within a few months. But it started as protest, and then later, all of a sudden, they start picking up guns, and it becomes the foreign-backed mercenaries start getting shipped in, and then it becomes an all-out war of apocalyptic scenarios. Within 1-2 years after the peaceful protests. It's the unfortunate reality is that now that is as long as until you kick out these people, these NGOs, until you kick out the people, these financial institutions, your country's always going to be in trouble. And I think that's one thing that Russia needs to focus on in the future is to encourage their countries to do similar to what they've done in their country. Is that the countries that are backed by Russia need to follow in the Russian example of kicking out these NGOs. They're often foreign agents. They act like they're humanitarian organizations, but they're not humanitarian organizations. They're loosely veiled spy rings, or at the very minimum, these are people that are lackeys. They send people that are young, naive, and they believe that they're doing good work and that they're helping villagers out or whatnot. But what they're really doing is they're writing reports, and they don't even realize what they're doing. And then there's a few people that actually know what they're doing back at the office that take back all that stuff, and they use that as intel. That's how these NGOs often work, is that 95% of them might have no intelligence background whatsoever, but 5% do, and they're the one that's running the show. And all those banking institutions, they need to encourage that Western banking institutions they need to start to push them out and replace them with, banks that are in the BRICS sphere. That's really what, you talk about a reconfiguration of the world. That's one of the major things that's going to happen in order for the shift to happen, is that there has to be a little bit more of aggressive stance for a lot of third world countries against the more veiled part of imperialism.
The problem with NGOs is that they're actually not doing anything illegal. So Russia can't really remove, for example, like US Aid, which is a very well-known NGO. It can't just go to the office and demand that they leave, because they're not actually doing anything illegal. Unfortunately, there are many loopholes in any legal code of any country. There are many loopholes which allow NGOs to operate, and as a result, people start to criticize the government and say, "Well, why don't you remove them?" But they just say, "Well, we can't because we're not doing anything illegal." And but another way of looking at it is that Russia is really the true sense of democracy, in that it allows everyone a voice, even if you are against the state power. In America, I don't think you can walk around the street shouting anti-Obama things and expect to not be arrested or to be detained. But Russia, I think, is more of a democracy in that sense, and from all sides of the spectrum, anti-government, pro-government, left, right, whatever it is, everyone's allowed a voice. But the system in Russia is different in the sense that everything is centralized towards the Kremlin, and so it's very difficult to have a color revolution in Russia, because there is no real pockets of space to operate that are not being watched, seen by the Kremlin. And one other thing I want to mention is that actually the war in southeast Ukraine, there are many Western NGOs who operate in the two republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, and they are a fundamental part of how this whole so-called anti-terrorist operation operates. So Russia has to work out exactly how to stop the operations of these NGOs, because obviously the work that they do impedes things like the Minsk agreements, which is a peace process signed by the republics in the southeast of Ukraine and the government in Kiev. But it's not easy, because Russia can't just people want Russia to go in with tanks and to basically liberate, to cleanse southeast Ukraine. But actually, that's what America wants. America wants frustration to grow and for Russia to come in, because as soon as Russia crosses that border, the actual level of genocide and brothers killing brothers will increase exponentially. And really, that doesn't sit well with anyone, let alone someone in Moscow or someone in Dnipropetrovsk. No one wants to see their fellow countrymen being killed. So it's a very delicate issue, things like NGOs, because how you deal with that, as I said, they're not actually operating illegally, and there are loopholes in the law. So it's kind of like a game of chess, so to speak. But the system in Russia seems to be working, because in the recent Duma elections, the opposition parties received no momentum, and actually Putin's United Russia Party only strengthened. So I don't think anybody's really worried about any marches up to the Kremlin, akin to what happened in Kiev.
Well, I think that they have 89% of the support of the Russian people. That's what Putin's approval rating is. It's something like that. There is going to be no moves happening from the people anytime soon. Any kind of deposal of Vladimir Putin, which is such a long shot for so many reasons. But it would have to come from something very sneaky. It would have to be it would have to be something from within, I think, because there's not enough public support for a color revolution to succeed. 89% support Putin, and I'm sure about maybe 1 or 2% the population actually want any kind of action to be taken against Vladimir Putin. People love him over there, and I can see why. He's practically brought that country back from the brink. And when he inherited that country from Boris Yeltsin in 1999, that country was near financial collapse. That country had just been involved with terrible terrorist attacks happening from United States-backed Chechen terrorists, and so much more. There was the country. I mean, you had people. The poverty was so high in Russia. That's like. You had the mail order brides and all that was going on. That was a product, really, of the poverty. Was these women that were, pretty much selling themselves to American men for the money. It's a terrible reality that happened, and that's what happens when your country practically gets sold off to oligarchs. And these same kind of oligarchs now run West Ukraine. What we're seeing in West Ukraine is kind of like the Russia of the 90s, is that people that made their money off of opportunism, people like Berezovsky, who practically took over the media by he bought it for like $50 million, and it was worth $1 billion. His buy of Russian state television, he bought like the whole thing. And then what's also odd about that guy is that Berezovsky actually works with I think Marvin Bush, one of the Bush. There's like a they have two of the Bush brothers are involved with some of the more shady, less public dealings in the Bush family. And I think it's actually it's Calvin, I think, is the one that has the learning program that was financed by Berezovsky. That his learning program was only instituted because of George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind Act. And that shows the corrupt dealings in the inside business of the Bush administration. But Russia is definitely different than Syria or Libya or any other country like that, because ultimately there is no significant group that is against Vladimir Putin. The communists even like him. People that long for that Soviet nostalgia, they like him. Conservative right-wing types like him, because they see him as a person restoring traditional Christian values to the country. Moderates like him because they think that he's just doing a good job and he's a pragmatic leader. You have all across the spectrum. Even Muslims like him because they believe that he's trying to fix the situation in the Middle East and is helping countries like Syria, and also has respected the Muslim population not only in his country but in the Middle East. He's really done more for Muslims around the world than anybody. So, of course, even the Muslims that live inside of Russia like him. There is no demographic that is overwhelmingly against Vladimir Putin besides the oligarchs. that he had jailed people like Kordosky, Berezovsky, and then the rest of them, they're too scared to even do anything. They might secretly be against him with some of the billionaires inside of Russia, but Putin has put himself in charge. He has told them that we're the Kremlin, we're in charge, not you guys. This isn't the United States. This isn't where you can buy people off. This isn't where you can do something like what happened here in 1933, where things started going a little bit went a little bit against their way, and then they tried to do a coup against the government in 1933, the business plot, as it's called. I want to ask is that inside the UK, you guys had UKIP. That was Nigel Farage and all of them. What's your thoughts on them, honestly? I just wanted to hear this from actual Brit. What's your thoughts on UKIP?
Okay. UKIP represents the sect of society which is I don't want to say this, but I'm afraid I have to because it's true. They represent a sect of society that is inherently racist, and the main, obviously, point on the UKIP manifesto is to be anti-EU and to restore really this nationalism in Britain, but there's major contradictions in UKIP's manifesto. The main one, which really bothers me, is that they are pro-NATO and they want to increase GDP spending towards the NATO bloc. But yet, Nigel Farage is seemingly pro-Assad, or he's anti-American. He doesn't agree with American military interventions. He wants good relations with Russia. So I don't understand how you can hope to achieve those things, but yet just stay inside the NATO bloc. It makes no sense to me. But UKIP in this country really, I think after the Brexit, I think its purpose is really dissolved. I don't think it has a purpose now. And there are various people who were members of UKIP who were forced to resign because ultimately they started to voice what the party was really about, and a lot of these things were racist undertones. There was one incident where a member of UKIP referred to Africa as Bongo land or something like that. And
wow.
It really didn't sit well with anyone because obviously Britain is a much more multiracial society now, much more accepting. And to hear things like that is quite shocking. I don't think there is a party in this country which really is able to form a good relationship with Russia, and even the Labour Party. It's still a bit of a hostage towards America, and particularly the George Bush Obama era of America. It's there's just many contradictions, which there is no one person who when you hear their name you think, oh yes, they will really fix this country. But obviously France has people like Marine Le Pen, who is extremely pro-Russian, is extremely anti-Wahhabi, Salafist, Saudi, Qatar, is against military interventions, wants to put French people first. Britain doesn't have someone like that. People will tell me Jeremy Corbyn, but Jeremy Corbyn is pro-migrant, pro-refugee, So really, he wants to destroy the remnants of what British identity is. But yeah,
Yeah,
UKIP is really a spent force.
well, it's like I said, is that ultimately all around the world you have to remember is that we people that are against NATO and against the old way, the old order. There's not really that many of them in the Western countries, and against ultimately the Rothschilds, they have a deep grip on a lot of, like I was saying, all around the world and on the Western countries. And in Britain, I mean, come on, they have a big portion of their influence right there in the UK. They're not going to ever let the UK go. And that's why, and you talk about the UK, and UK politics makes me laugh. I was going to say sarcastically when you said someone that could fix your country. Ed Miliband, he'll totally, he'll come in with the weirdo. I remember the reason he lost the election is what they were saying over here in the Army is because apparently the guy was too weird, and they showed him with pictures of eating the sandwich or whatever. And
This is the thing, these people are just so weak, and you can't imagine them being the leader of a country which wants to develop and wants to grow, wants to progress on the international arena. Miliband, Cameron, even Theresa May, these people are just weak, and I don't see anyone who can really grab the bull by the horns and say, this is what we're doing, and if you don't like it, leave.
And like you said, UKIP that's the problem with a lot of what I've seen is that some European nationalists they call themselves to be nationalists, but they don't really ask for much of a change in the status quo besides the immigrants. That's the only thing they seem to be really against. UKIP, from what I've seen, are complete phonies. They are nothing more than really just a party that somewhat caters to they cater to some of the more racist aspects of the British society and the more right-wing aspect of British society. But at the same time, offer no real change. They're not like National Front that I've noticed. I think National Front, from what I've seen so far, they seem to be more closer to the real deal. Some of Marine Le Pen's rhetoric does worry me, but when she talks about Syria, she actually seems to be intelligent and actually talking from a real perspective. She's actually talking in the real world about these Salafist, Wahhabist groups that are roaming around Syria and destroying the country and being backed by Western powers, including France as of right now. And then when they have a terrorist attack, like what's happened three in recent time, even though one had the 11/13/15 attack that happened that killed that had inside job written all over it, but that'll be for different. Even there's one of the guys that was playing in the concert hall when that happened said that he saw the security was in on it, and
it's true, the Eagles of Death Metal. He said that,
yeah. From what I saw, that stunk of the high hell. The 11/13.
I agree with you. These attacks were definitely to incite anti-Muslim sentiment and to justify further bombing of Syria and Iraq under the guise of fighting ISIS. These events are too well coordinated, and it's like 9/11. When we look at what happened after 9/11, there's no way that you can't say that entering Iraq was possible without 9/11, because it wasn't, and entering Afghanistan was not possible without 9/11. And so when you think like that, well, there's no way that it couldn't have been pre-planned. So yes, the attacks in Paris were definitely designed to justify not only France's entry into Syria, but also the general bloc, Western bloc of America, Britain, France, Germany, Holland, Spain, all these countries, and Belgium. They all came to bomb Syria after these attacks. So we can simply assume that that was the main intent.
Well, yeah, we talk about 9/11. That was the event that not only changed the future of America, but it changed the future of the world. And when that was so much evidence, and I've talked about this, many times about the architects, the engineers that refuted the original story. I mean, and ultimately, what's terrible about that is that they ultimately did kill 3,000 of Americans. And when I say they. That group all around the world, the Rothschilds, and then below them, the United States government, and all these different people involved. I mean, you have Dick Cheney that when it was going on, he has his feet up on the table, acting like he's having a chill day while he's watching people getting killed inside the Trade Center. You got Bush that's hears the news and he keeps reading to the kids down in Florida. He's like, he just gets news that our country has been attacked by terrorists and that
I think it is so important for people to understand that these people killing 2,000 of their own citizens is nothing. They don't care. It's like eating breakfast for them, whatever. And as soon as people are able to understand and accept that, several other processes and understandings can happen regarding other things, but for the vast majority of Americans, they can't even comprehend the idea that 2,000 people can just be like sacrificial pawns. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, and to them, of course, that's really not. They don't have. I mean, you're talking about people that they've lost any sense of humanity. These people that are at the very top, they're coordinating all this. These people are sociopath, psychopathic characters. You have Cheney that really was like when you talk about a government official that really personified that level of sociopathic behavior, it was Cheney, really. And then Bush kind of is like
John McCain.
Yeah, but McCain's another one. And you got these people, they have them, those people you got those characters, and you have the ones like Bush, Obama, that they act like they have human emotions, but ultimately they're in on the game, and they're really more of spokesmen. And that's what the president ultimately is when you look at it. That's more of really just a PR guy between the people that really run the country in the United States, and they do make some decisions, but it's not a lot. Ultimately, the guys making all the decisions are the think tanks and all the people above him. You got all the Pentagon, and then of course, the bankers at the top, the multiple ones. I mentioned the Rothschilds, but there's also Rockefellers and many other families, the Astors, the Bundys, people with a serious amount of money. Ultimately, the United States military, when you look at it, is a military for the super rich of all around the world, and you doing their interest. It's like the opposite of like a revolutionary army that would be to fight for the people's interest. No, the United States military is to fight for the corporate interest, or whoever really has whatever is willing to put in a bid to rent out the United States military. And so many people have been sacrificed in the United States military. Here, Smedley Butler was one of the first people to talk about it back in the early 1900s. A man who had been in the United States military he was in the Marines for over 30-something years, was talking about that. He had spent all his time working for what he described. This is not work for pride or humanity or anything like this. This is gangsterism. I could have taught Al Capone a few things, is what he said. He said that he was working as part of the muscle for capitalism. That's how he described the United States military. And Smedley Butler was also one of the people that he helped stop he pretty much exposed the 33 business coup before it actually happened, which was a few people, including one of the people that was implicated was Prescott Bush, who is George W.'s grandfather and H.W.'s father, a man that was actually his banking institution was shut down shortly for being accused of trading with the enemy during World War II. And yet his son becomes the president. His grandson becomes the president. His other grandson almost becomes the president and becomes the governor of Florida when his other son is the president. the Bush family is like it's like an onion, you know. You just start chopping into it. You got one layer of the diabolical, and then there's 10 more layers of diabolical inside. That each one gets worse and worse.
Yeah. Everything you're describing is really this 100-year project since World War One. And in the 60s, there was a chance to really break up this project, and that was with John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy, unfortunately, he well, I say unfortunately because it cost him his life, but he started pursuing the real cause of the problem, and that was the Israeli parasite. He wanted the Israeli lobby to register as an official foreign lobby, and they didn't want that. So what happened, and I think after that it gave them 30, 40, 50 years CIA of real dominance, and now what we're seeing today in Syria is the end of that. It's finished. They put everything they had into these moderate rebels, Al Qaeda, ISIS, everything they had into it, and Russia has been preparing for this for a long time. And my favorite analogy is when we say that America was building the F-35 jet back in the 70s, and at that same time, Russia was building the S-300 surface missile system. So we have a defensive weapon being built in the east, and you have an offensive weapon being built in the west. And today we have the F-35-2, which is clearly absolutely useless and is a waste of $1 trillion. And Russia has the S-400, which basically was when deployed in Syria, it was checkmate. So we have defense versus offense, and clearly defensive mindset has won. And the last 100 years, really, of this aggression, which stems from the Anglo-Saxon Empire, is really coming to an end. And it's going to be interesting to see now who Russia's the fastest to kiss China and Russia's feet, because that's where the money is now. That's where the gold is. That's where the oil and gas is. And that's why I say that it's not what Trump will do, it's what he can do. And he's been given his hand, and now he has to look and see what he can do with his hand. And,
well, you mentioned about JFK is that if Donald Trump does anything that threatens the people that are really in charge, their grip, the New World Order's grip on the United States, is that he will end up just the same as John F. Kennedy, or at least he'll try. And because that's what John.
I can't imagine that an assassination would happen, because it would be too obvious. And how could they possibly frame it so that the trail doesn't lead back?
They wouldn't do it the same way, I would say. It might not be that he gets his head blown off on national television. His head blows up on national television, but they'll have it this time. I mean, come on, he's 70 years old. He's out of shape, kind of. They'll just say he had a heart attack. They'll poison him or something like that. And then nobody will even question it. They'll just say, well, yeah, he worked himself to death on that campaign trail. He was going all around the country, and the guy was really not in the best shape. He was 70 years old. Very few people would even think twice about it, I don't think. Average American, yes, the people that are actually paying attention, yes, of course, they'd be like, hey, that's a little bit odd that the guy dies in office, right after he said that. But, but the average American, they would probably say, oh, yeah, that sucks. Now we got Mike Pence, and Mike Pence is like a new Dick Cheney. The dude's like the dude's like is like a classic supervillain you would see in some comic book. He's the politician that's telling you that superhero is a villain and needs to be stopped. It's like, yes, we must stop Iron Man. He's a menace to society, and that would be Mike Pence talking. He's that senator.
I think that regarding Trump, if there is still any real presence of the deep state, and I mean that if there's any real if the Israeli lobby still has influence, I think they can just accept that Trump can have his 5 years, or maybe 10 at most. He can have his little period, and things will de-escalate slowly globally. But as I said, if there is still a deep state present, and if the CIA is still operates the same way, I think they can afford 5 years, and they can plan for the next guy, who or woman who can re-spark this desire to basically eliminate Russia. So maybe it's better, instead of killing Trump, it's better just to accept that the next 5 years is time to consolidate and to think about how possibly to be more effective against Russia. But I don't see any way the American military can confront Russia in any domain, and I mean from the sea fleet to the air to things like tanks. I'm not being biased here. I look at what Russia has and I look at what America has, and I just don't see how there can be a confrontation. I think it's and Syria, in fact, for Russia, has provided the Russian military with a valuable testing ground for many new armaments, and especially pilots of jets. They now have real combat experience. They've used Admiral Kuznetsov, the aircraft carrier now. They're able to refine all these things. The T-90 tank has been used. Various missile systems like Bastion, the S-400 I mentioned. All these things have been tested. America, it can't even get this F-35 off the ground. The F-22 has oxygen tank problems. The various ships, the Zumwalt ships in the Navy can barely go out to shore before they break down.
A paradox is happening is that they want to heavily build up their military machine, but they rely on defensive subcontractors to do it. That want to make stuff cheaply. They want to make a profit, so they're going to try to do stuff at a more inexpensive rate rather than try to put quality parts. Because that's the difference between the United States and Russia. Is that I think Russia has less. I believe their military stuff is more state-owned. They don't have like companies that make, practically everything.
That's correct. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the Russian Air Force would make their.
In general, they have fewer things, but the quality is much more. So, for example, America has more boats, more ships, and I believe it has more jets as well. But the quality is not. It's very poor. And you only need to look at the latest Russian fighter jet, the Pak-FA or the T-50, and you can see this is set the benchmark now for air-to-air fighting jets. But as you said, it is really about making profit. And I don't think there's any intention to have a conflict with Russia. And Trump now, he sees that there's this big $20 trillion national debt, and so it's time now to go back to the drawing board and to maybe start from the ground up even, because at the moment the American military is. Probably even more embarrassing than some African countries.
Yeah. Hey, thanks Ollie Richardson for being on my show. We're in the last minute. We're about to reach the music outro, and we'll be going off for the rest of the year now. Will be 2017. We'll be back on New Year's Day, 9 o'clock Eastern, folks. Thanks everyone for listening, and it was a pleasure having you on my show, Ollie. Hopefully you'll be on my show at a later time. I mean, pretty interesting conversation, and I think we got a lot of good info out there. And thanks for staying up late. I know it's really late over there. It's like, what, 4 in the morning?
It's all about educating and talking about these things.
One and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down,